I'm going to start introducing everybody and myself as people roll in a little bit more. Tonight's topic, I think, is something that's on all of our minds if we're a parent. What role, if any, technology plays in early parenting with young children, since that's where we all are right now, and we'll share how old our children are. But to start, I just wanted to tell you guys who I am. I'm Jenny Moness. I'm a co-founder of Union Square Play, a New York City play space that really grew virtually during COVID and has now just reopened physically in Manhattan and hopefully in many more places. So it's really fun to see where people are calling in from and giving us ideas, or me ideas, of where maybe we could go next. I have a personal Instagram account, Jenny Moness, where I share my own parenting with my girls who are 2 and 4, and where I share kind of guidance on respectful parenting and kind of what shapes my parenting based on my own studying and experience working with young children. And yeah, technology is something that's at the forefront, like I said, of my mind a lot, like phones around and then within products and toys. And parents are often asking me about my views on that. So I feel like there's going to be a lot to say myself, but I'm really eager to hear from our panelists who are pretty awesome and who I personally know, each of them separately. So Sophie Brickman has written a book about this topic, Baby Unplugged, and I asked her beforehand if I could kind of say that, sorry, the end of the kind of, well, actually, we'll get there, but if anyone is logging on or calling in with any guilt around technology, the kind of overall takeaway from Sophie's book, which is really amazing, and I met her as she was kind of doing research for it, is that it's ultimately parents' intuition. Each child is so different, each parent is different, each family's, you know, place in the world, honestly, is so different. So I really valued the book because of that and how it kind of took away that guilt, but we'll get into more detail with that. And then Abby, who is a sustainability expert. Abby's Food Court is your kind of Instagram and beyond. And so I think from that perspective, you kind of can assume what your viewpoint might be and where we're kind of all aligned. Like, kind of believing in less is more, and technology often stands for more in that respect, but I'll let you elaborate there too. And then Sarah Bren, who I met through a course on respectful parenting, and actually before that, as she was looking for early daycare centers. So we've crossed paths in many ways. She's an incredible clinical psychologist. I often recommend her to all the moms I'm connected with, and she brings a lot of her own perspective as a mom of young children herself. So I just love that all of our panelists tonight are experts, but approachable and definitely alleviate guilt in many ways, because you kind of are all in it as well. So before we kind of dive in, I just want to kind of, reiterate or clarify like what tonight's about. It's really just, we're kind of overwhelmed by gadgets and, the newest things to buy and the fanciest things to buy to make our lives easier, but also that we're kind of told that it's the best to get because it's the newest and most kind of cutting edge and technologically sophisticated. So I think in today's world, that usually kind of stands for something we need to get. But when it comes to early childhood and parenting, everyone's kind of not so sure, or at least I think more and more we get questions around that. So let's start with you, Sophie. Can you tell us like what your story is before we dive in, just kind of obviously I introduced you, but like who you are both as a parent and what led you to kind of this topic area.
Absolutely. So like very specifically, my husband led me to this topic area because he's a tech guy, and we were, we lived in San Francisco for a while. He worked at a bunch of startups. He like loves technology. You talk about like gadgets overwhelming us, like gadgets overwhelm my bedroom. It's just like there's gadgets everywhere, and he strapped things on and like, monitors all sorts of metrics. And I sort of was like, whatever. And then my oldest daughter was born. I'm a mom of three. So my oldest is now 5.5. And I write about this in the introduction of the book, but there was like a very specific moment that was very crystallizing for me about my need to get a handle on technology, like both in my life and in my daughter's, which is she came home from the hospital, like totally healthy kid, day 3 of her life on this planet. And he was like, here's this thing, like we're going to strap it onto her and it's going to like take all this data and it's going to make sure her oxygen level is good and her heart rate is good and like up to snuff. And I was like, I don't know what I'm doing. Like I've never held a newborn before. I wasn't very comfortable with babies. I was like, sure, why not? It's like an extra added layer of protection. And in the middle of the night, this alarm started blaring. And I really thought that something horrible had happened to her heart or her oxygen level or something. And it had just lost connection to the Wi-Fi because we lived in this like crappy walk up with that. It was always losing its Wi-Fi. And in that moment, I was like, I need to get a handle on my own tech usage, which has been very sort of willy-nilly. And now we have this perfect little specimen. Like, what is it going to mean for her? And so I'm a reporter by training. I was a food journalist for years. And like, I am not an expert, but I know how to get to them, which is partially how I got to you, Jenny, because I was like, I need somebody who really understands the world of play. And I knew that you were that person. And so I wrote an article for the New York Times that was sort of just about the smart nursery and how nurseries were getting to be like NASA mission control and like really what that meant. And if we needed that level of monitoring. And I got so much feedback from people writing me being like, oh my God, I'm wrestling with the same thing. And so I thought, okay, like I've struck a nerve. It's not just me. And there's more here. So I spent, like selfishly, 2 years researching this book to get to the bottom of these questions of where tech can really help, where it can hurt, like what we really need, and how to utilize it in a way where you're like a modern mother in the world and you're not living off the grid, like how to do it in a smart way. And so I have a 5-year-old, my middle daughter, who's now 2.5. I got the book deal like right before she was born. So as I was reporting, I was like going through the newborn phase, and I have a 15-week-old, maybe he's 16 weeks. You really just forget with the third child. He is about 4 months old. And so I'm like kind of going through this book promotion process with him. And so I'm like, it's very, very close to my heart, all of this stuff of young children and technology. So it's a very personal story.
Thank you for that. Yeah, I think I probably take a little bit for granted today. A mom who's like 8 months pregnant is like, can you just tell me what I need to have for, my nursery? I work in early childhood, but like, and she's right. Like, even if you feel like you're an expert, like I definitely overgot things, and then realize like okay, I really don't need this. Is actually harmful for my mental state and like whatever. But yeah, I hope we offer tonight, like just based on our own experiences and of course a little bit of our professions, like what, guide a little bit, but that it ultimately comes down to like, I think each person's experience, like you can kind of guide, but yeah. So Abby, can you tell us like what, kind of brings you to this topic? Of course, it's, like I said, you believe in sustainability and in all areas of the home, as I know, because you were in my mom group and I could, you shared pieces of that. But yeah.
So
in terms of your own parenting around this.
Yes. So I'm a sustainability expert. I'm also a dietitian in, the health and wellness field, and work primarily with women moms, new moms, pregnant moms. And in general, my philosophy is just the simpler, the better. And it's really hard to get to simple, right? We're not living in an environment that makes it conducive to live kind of more
simply, in terms of all the stimuli that we're around all the time, right? It just doesn't make it easy. But living a more sustainable, eco-friendly, non-toxic life, when that's kind of motivating your choices, it naturally leads you to make the healthiest choices for the most part for you and your family. And that, automatically when I make any kind of purchasing decision, or I'm about to make a purchasing decision, I'm thinking about sustainability. I'm thinking about the life cycle of this product, or how long are we going to use it for? What's the impact of this product that it's going to have on my family, right? So that applies equally to anything, but especially to technology, because when you're a really tired new mom, any kind of thing that could potentially give you more sleep or help your child, right? You're going to be sucked into thinking that you need more stuff, and need, the next gadget or the next thing. And we always need to be thinking, like, do I actually need that? Will that actually help? And can that actually help me in this particular situation? And then the less we consume, usually the better. And that applies equally to technology.
Yeah, I want to hear more, because I feel like people may want to argue, like, isn't it simpler to just like whip out technology in moments?
Well,
And
yes, but if you
can-
have purchased like 15 of that thing, and now
Right.
you're getting the new version of the thing, everyone is just telling their experience of success with that thing.
Right.
And do you need that thing? Are you going to get success with that thing? And I work so much with women, and even I see this in myself. It's almost like a knee-jerk reaction when something doesn't work for me that someone has told me worked for them. And I internalize it, like, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with my baby? Why didn't that, magically put him to sleep? And things like that we internalize, quote unquote, failure of a thing, when really that thing just didn't help us.
Right. And, bringing you in, Sarah, like, adding on to that point, Abby, of like, people may argue that it's simpler to use some of this stuff. It makes life simpler, it makes situations simpler. But I think something that often comes up in, the parenting that Sarah and I, connected through, and that, like, I think we all do, which is like just respecting children, but just also thinking ahead, right? Like, what it's simple now, seemingly so, but then, thinking longer term, it's not really so much that it's simple long term, right? Eventually you kind of have to deal with what you were using the tool for. But yeah, I've totally been there and using it, but then eventually you have to kind of figure it out, right? Unless I guess you buy like another piece of technology to help you figure it out, but you can't ever keep up. But Sarah, can you kind of, on that segue, talk a little bit about, how challenges that often we use technology for can actually be moments of learning? That's kind of what I was getting at, that like it could be moments of learning now, or maybe you're like, I can't deal with this now, and so you save it for later. But just regardless, I know you believe in that challenges aren't necessarily things to solve. So yeah, just if you can just like talk a little bit about, the friction that can come up in parenting with, usually things that we might look to technology for.
Totally. Well, I mean, one of my thoughts that's coming up is like, okay, the swing, or the, TV, or like give them your phone, or like like I think sometimes we are quick to, let me put it this way. we live in a culture that is immediate. We're very used to immediate gratification, and our kids are becoming increasingly more used to immediate gratification. And this idea that like, if we have something that's like a quick fix, it turns it off, it gets it better right away. Like, that's great. Why don't we use that? And it's like, okay, yes, it can make, like you said, Jenny, it can make your life easy in the moment. But if we create this sort of neurological wiring where we're always expecting things to be as easy as they possibly can be right away, we're kind of atrophying our distress tolerance muscles, and we're kind of not practicing sitting in discomfort or sitting in impatience or sitting in frustration or having to solve a problem that takes a while to solve. And frankly, these are all things that we want to model for our kids. And I can't imagine any parent that says, I don't want my kid to know how to solve problems or to tolerate frustration or to sit in a discomfort, an uncomfortable state for a little bit of time and feel like I can survive this. This is fine. I watch mom and dad do this. I watch them struggle with things and I can do it too. And so I think, I am a mom of two. I absolutely go for quick fixes sometimes. I used a snoo, which is like, if you're a rye parent, like that's.
Sorry, the technology in my home is just like really just not good.
But like, I think I used a swing, which also like, but I think the way that I use these things matters more than what I use. And I think that's also true for a lot of parents. It's like, I use those things for me to get a break. I would put my child in the swing in the mornings to make breakfast and have a cup of coffee. And that was a time where they would, he or she, I have a boy and a girl, would like chill out. But that was for me to get a break versus my kid is crying. They can't calm down. I'm going to put them in the swing to just like rock them out, like turn it off. And so, and which I've done before too, right? Zero judgment. Sometimes you just need that extra help from the swing. But if that's your go-to, your immediate, automatic, kind of impulsive, we have some discomfort, let's turn it off right away, then I think we get into a pattern of becoming really reliant on that. And I think we see this in our own lives. I think our kids see it in their own lives. And I think as parents, we can sometimes, we have a responsibility to just be mindful of paying attention to it. We're never going to get it right all the time. That's certainly not the goal, but it's just to be paying attention to the aggregate. I often say parenting happens in the aggregate. It doesn't, each individual moment doesn't matter that much, but it's like, what are the patterns? What are we doing without thinking? That's where we can make some really interesting and useful changes. But I don't think gadgets are a problem. I think how we use them can become a problem if we're becoming very mindlessly, automatically go to that, turn the switch off instead of sitting in the discomfort saying, how can I problem solve this? What else can I try before I go to that thing that kind of shuts it off?
Yeah, just kind of shows how many different like elements there are. Like, do we use it as a crutch for us, a crutch for our children? Do we use it and it complicates things more, to Abby's point? But I think, going back to the start of parenting, Sophie, kind of what you were talking about, how you were like, I didn't know what I was doing. So I was like, okay, we should get this. How do you feel like that can easily turn into, making us kind of go a little bit nuts, like you brought up, I'm sure it was the owlette, but so like, then did you not get a monitor? And like, what are your thoughts on, if that didn't work for you, does something else that's less technologically sophisticated work for you? Or is it, how do you find, or how did you personally find that balance, especially as like a new mom from the start?
Sure. And I love what Sarah said about like parenting happens in the aggregate. And like, there are definitely, moments in which tech can make your life easier. I think what I realized and kind of what was hammered home to me when I was interviewing all these experts, and I spoke to people about, like, I spoke to neurologists, I spoke to a lot of developmental psychologists, I spoke to pediatricians, like I kind of like went deep into the nerdy part of all of this and like trying to figure out what happens like really in the brains of young kids and what is best for them. And like the promise of technology is that it simplifies moments. that it will, you can crunch the right amount of data and then like your kid will sleep through the night, or like if you just know this one thing, then that thing will happen. And I think for sure, like I also use the snoo because like, Harvey Karp sent me the snoo for research purposes. And I like had this love-hate relationship with it because my second daughter, like she would immediately fall asleep. And I was like, wait, but like, I'm the only one who can rock her. But like, also this is so great because now I have my hands back and like, it's very complicated. But I think the promise of tech is that it simplifies things. In the act of simplifying though, for me, I found that it cluttered my brain up and it cluttered there's more data, there's more number crunching. And when it comes to like the shows and things that kids watch, or the toys that are marketed to us as being very enriching, the implication is that more is more, and that like more gadgetry is good and more enrichment is really good, and you have to actively optimize every moment. And what I found that was hammered home to me from developmental psychology, it's like for kids less is more. And like I think you said this, Jenny, it's just like the cardboard box is better for them than the toy inside it. Jenny's gone. So I think the promise of hacking parenting is very complicated, because if you hack parenting and you kind of like put a band-aid over that moment where your kid is having a tantrum, like maybe you quash it in the moment, but then you don't have the ability to really like work through something with your kid and teach your kid how to work through something and kind of get closer to your kid in the process. And for sure, like it takes work and it's exhausting. And that's why we look for quick fixes. But ultimately I found that most of the tech that's marketed us, and we are fish in a barrel, like underslept parents who have this like perfect human to make perfect. I think ultimately less is more, which should be kind of a freeing notion for parents and like a less anxiety producing notion. Like the kids can be bored, the kids can have a tantrum, you don't have to like constantly be tracking everything. They will grow up by and large just fine. And that's sort of my big takeaway.
Yeah. And as you said, with the cardboard box example, I definitely, am aligned in all that. I think, finding that place where like, for me, I brought in technology when I was pregnant with my second and was really nauseous very early in the morning and would put it on for 10 minutes. I don't think that that's harmful, or even if it was a half an hour, but it wasn't used like, oh, you're upset and I can't handle this right now, so I'm going to use it. But the other day in one of our classes at Union Square Play, like we were setting up a class that wasn't my own using natural materials. And I was like, there's not enough here, like in comparison to how I set up with cardboard boxes and things like that. Anyway, the children were so engaged with these natural materials that you really didn't need more. And I think we often don't give that opportunity to see first, right? Like we can always bring things out. Like if our child is tired and isn't engaging with something while we're cooking dinner, and we like Sarah said, need those few minutes, like then maybe put them in the swing. But I think we don't like give opportunity first to learn from our kids in that way, right? Like I think a lot of times it's like my kid won't have fun in a cardboard box. Try the cardboard box. If that's not great, then maybe add something before it's just like, okay, I need to go to the technology version of the box. So yeah, I love that you kind of are saying that.
I think that's such a good point, Jenny, because I think one of the things, like, okay, I'm a psychologist. We create interventions, right? Like clinical interventions, but we always start with the least intrusive clinical intervention first, and you work your way up, right? And that's just like our training is based on that model, right? So you can apply that same idea with your kids, with their play, with tantrums, with technology. It's like start with the least intrusive thing first. And if that's not working, level up, right? But like I see,
yeah,
like start with the cardboard box. And then if they're not loving the cardboard box, maybe add in like, some knobs to turn versus being like, they don't like cardboard boxes, let's have the TV, right? Like I think like we also, I think as millennial parents and whatever, we grew up with technology. We grew up with sort of lower distress tolerance, lower frustration tolerance, more difficulty tolerating being bored. And so I think we're very quick as a culture to be like, this isn't working, throw it out. Get, what's next? And I think maybe the idea that like start very incrementally shifting things as you're trying to figure out what works for you versus being so quick to say, I can't do this, or my kid can't do this. So yeah, just being gradual with stuff too.
Yeah. And Sophie, that's what I was thinking in terms of the question I asked, like the Owlet is, or whatever you use, is probably like the most monitoring. So then, you can go back, right?
Not
like you
even.
can start with
It's
the
not
more
even the most monitoring. I mean, there is like onion level headline crazy monitoring that you can do for your infant now. That like, computer vision, computer learning, automated things that, track minute movements for the kids, and, the sensors all over their bodies and all sorts of things. So yeah, the Owlet is one of a slew
Right.
of smart things for kids,
But it just shows the same could go for us, right? Like not only our kids, but us too. Like why not start with less? And then if we don't feel comfortable, like add on, and not necessarily to buy every version, but to just see maybe we'll feel satisfied with less monitoring and getting to know our baby and their sleep and all of that. Abby, someone had asked about watching TV during nursing, and I just for some reason felt like I would want your opinion on that if I were asking. So can you share?
I think, first of all, in those early morning, in those really super early times, if you are going to fall asleep yourself and you have to put on the TV to keep yourself awake to be able to nurse your child, I fully support it. I think I did so much. Eventually I had to just like give up social media on my phone because I realized it was robbing me of being present with my child when I was nursing, but in those early stages, but to keep you awake, totally fine. Also, just remember from a health perspective, like we're getting a lot of blue light from these devices and that interferes with sleep. So, this is like, there's a lot of research that supports that, right? It's not really debated at this point about the negative effects of blue light. So that's going to affect you, and it's also going to affect your child. But if you need it, that's okay. Maybe that'll be like the theme of the night. Like we don't want to make anybody feel bad about your choice in a given moment. I think from my perspective, it's always, is this an automatic thing that you're going to out of habit? You're bored, you're tired, and you're going to put on the TV, and you're aware of it, or are you aware of it? And are you consciously making the decision? I think if anybody watched The Social Dilemma on Netflix, that was a huge eye-opening experience to learn about how on the back end of all these technology platforms and devices, the heart of it is getting us to be addicted to these devices, using psychological principles to literally have us be addicted. So to break that cycle, we need to bring awareness. And that's where I think we can really fall down a trap as parents and just as anyone who uses technology, when it crosses a line from being aware of a decision we're making to something that's just automatic.
Yeah.
And are our children just seeing that anytime we're bored, are we just going to our phones? I think that awareness is really important. So if you know that in that moment you need to watch TV, or you just feel disconnected from your friends or disconnected from people, and you really want to watch a TV show and you nurse for 30, 40 minutes and that's your time to get in the show, totally fine. I think that's healthy for everyone involved. If that downregulates you, maybe if it's during the day so that the baby's not sleeping right after, that's a different scenario versus you just automatically, every time you go to nurse, you pick up your phone. Every time you go to nurse, you're putting on the TV. That automatic behavior, I think, is less helpful.
Yeah. When it sort of becomes mindless, right? Or like this shortcut, someone asked about putting their infant is attached and they put on the TV to be able to put the baby down for a few minutes. And, is that okay? And I think, Abby, what you were saying is sort of like, you know, strengthening the undoing muscle. I'm kind of making up that term because I think you're so right. Like even sometimes when I'm with my kids and they're just playing, I am so tempted to just like take out my phone and answer an email, like when they're engaged. And then like there's times where I like sit on my hands, so to speak, and don't do that. And like I'm looking at them and enjoying, but then like there's that nagging muscle of like, okay, I'm not being productive. And so like you have to like undo that to really like get to the other side. And when you do, like you realize like your kids come over to you and like you learn something new and that motivates you to kind of keep doing it. So I wonder if, I know when I was nursing, I felt similarly, like I'm always nursing. I like need to do something productive during this time, like I had emails, whatever. But the times where I just like really didn't and like looked down more and like stroke the, and of course we can't always be like fully present, but you like get to the other side of it, even if it's like one of the 8 nursings you have. And then maybe it becomes 2 or less time that you're kind of doing it. So I like that answer. I don't think it's necessarily like harmful, but it's sort of like helping ourselves, right? To not have these like reflexive attachments to things in certain moments.
And also it's great to be an observer, right? So if you are nursing your baby while the TV is on, are they engaged? Are they distracted during a nursing session? Is it prolonging the nursing session? Be a little bit of a detective. I think something that technology robs us of is being detectives in our own lives, right? Like being able to take a moment without being prompted by technology to assess how we're feeling, how we're doing, how something is affecting us. We're being programmed to have alerts tell us these things as opposed to have us take a moment to see the effect of certain things. I know that if my toddler watches too much TV, he will not sleep at night. Like it's just, there's like a threshold during the day. So that's something that I've been able to observe in my own child. And then I can make a decision throughout the day based on my experience.
Yeah. Sarah, the question I just referred to Abby, in my conversation with Abby, I'd love for you to weigh in on, this parent who said that, she uses it because she needs to put her baby down sometimes and the baby's very attached. So I know
How old is
go
this
on and
child?
on.
For the person who asked the
It's an
question,
infant.
Casey,
Yeah.
how old is your baby? Only 3 months. Okay. So yeah, I mean, I think first of all, a 3-month-old probably isn't going to get much out of television. Like it might not capture their attention for as long as actually putting them down with the developmentally appropriate but challenging play materials. But if you've had a 3-month-old who's really been used to being put down in front of the TV from the beginning, they're going to get used to that. So you have to kind of like Jenny said, that undoing muscle, it works for kids too. Like we have to kind of, if we're going to switch a rhythm or a routine that we have in our home, in our relationship with our kids or in their day to day, we can absolutely do that. But we have to remember that we can't just like expect them to be able to flow with that shift without it being difficult for them at first. But like even the idea of getting a child used to being set down and separated from us, to be able to say, I'm gonna go to the bathroom now and I'm gonna set you down and I'm gonna put you in a place that I know is safe, right? Whether it's a bassinet or a playpen or a yes space or whatever it is that, I can lay my baby down here and they're safe. I can separate. They might be distressed and they might protest my exit, but they are physically safe. Conditioning our children or habituating to them to this process of like basically learning that I can separate from mom or dad or my caregiver and I'm safe. And this feeling of wanting them, whether it's separation anxiety or I just don't want to, I was comfortable there. Like, why are you making that warm, soft place go away? Is all healthy and normal and fine and safe. And to help our children be able to like understand through our own comfort in their distress. And I think there's a difference between distress and like, severe acute dysregulation, right? Like if our child is absolutely horrified or terrified or just really, really dysregulated, we don't like, we're not gonna leave them alone for that. But it's okay for our kids to protest and to cry and say, I don't like that you're leaving me. And then for us to go very confidently and then come back and return and reunite, let them know we always come back. But like, I think this sounds a little bit more about a question of how do I help my child get used to being separated from me or physically not held by me? This is something that we have to help kids learn to be able to tolerate. And it's something that like the more we practice it, the better they get at it. And I think using play as a vehicle through which we practice separating is really healthy, and it's important for their development. So, in RIE, which is the parenting philosophy that Jenny and I know each other from studying, it, we talk about, in the caregiving moments, that's when we have this connected time. And then when we're not doing this caregiving moments, we're letting them play. And so there's opportunities for us to get a break. Because if basically we think of caregiving moments as this opportunity, like, got to get this done so that we can get to the loving time with my kid. And we're always filling them up, always filling them up. And then we don't have a break. So the idea is we fill them up when we need to fill them up, and we do it with a lot of intention. So that might be the time when we're nursing to really be with our kid. And then we set them down with some toys in a space that feels comfortable to them. And we go and have a cup of coffee on the couch. And like, and again, this is something that if you haven't been doing this for your child's whole life, it might take some time for them to get used to it, but they absolutely can get used to it. And it's a way for there to be a little bit more of because I think, we do need breaks as parents. We cannot parent 24/7. That we will be burnt out, touched out. It's just not a recipe it's not a sustainable strategy. So I hope that answered the question.
Yeah, I want to just add, Sarah, because you said it's about like your baby adjusting to that, but also the parent, like being okay with your baby being upset, not letting them cry it out or not responding to those cries, but, knowing that they're learning that they're still safe if they're apart from you. Just this morning, I said bye to my very attached daughter, and she said, "Bye, mommy." And I was like, wait, like, why isn't she crying for me? And like, but then I'm like, that's so healthy. And I'm the one that is an adult and has a hard time saying bye. And like, she's already doing a good job at saying goodbye. And maybe it took 2 years, but slowly, with those little moments of saying goodbye. But yeah, just the person who asked that, we have used TV for me to be able to set down my reflux baby. So it doesn't mean to feel badly, but just something to like kind of build up for both of you being okay with it and them. Sophie, I don't know. Abby, is that you?
Are you on twice?
There was no noise on my end, so I don't know what's going on.
I wanted to ask you, Sophie, how, like, basically how can we be present with like our reliance while using technology? Like
$1 million question. I think,
or like, how have you covered that kind of? Obviously, you don't have to give away your book, but like, what?
the full attendee list. Yeah, I'm so happy I did it.
Wonder what this is. Is everyone seeing this?
Yeah, it seems like there's a.
I think there might be another Abby because I'm
I'm handling.
I will dive right in. I think this is like one of the biggest questions of how you treat technology in your own life. And, kids are born to mimic. And so when they see you, on your phone all the time, they will mimic that. I'm sure your kids have mimicked calling people and looking at your phone. And I spoke to this really, really, really amazing woman who's very high up at Sesame Street. I was like trying to get a sense for how you make really quality programming, and Sesame Street is really like lauded as being one of the best. And she said that like in part of her research, she had been in lots of preschools, and one of these preschool teachers was like, during pretend play, these 2-year-olds sit on the mat during like free play and choice time, and they pretend look down at pretend phones and like don't talk to each other, which is this like horrific dystopian view of what our kids are getting. And I don't think it's going to be that extreme, but all the time. But I think being cognizant of your own tech usage in front of your kids is so important. And I spoke to a lot of people about like hacks and things that they do. And some people like literally have lock boxes that they put their phone in the like front hall, or other people have charging stations. I've done my best to just carve out tech-free time for my family, even if it's just a half an hour. I do my best to put my phone in the other room during bath time and bedtime. And that's just like, it shouldn't be a luxury, but it feels like a luxury in this day and age when we're like 24/7 responding to emails and pings and stuff like that. But I've sort of, my husband and my husband was like, sure, I'm going to do that too. And then he like walked into bath time with an Apple Watch. And I was like, that's the exact same thing as a phone. It's just like masquerading as a phone. But I think it's trying to be intentional about it and knowing that like you really can't be as present with your kids as you want to be when you have this like very sexy gadget in your pocket that is buzzing all the time. Like it's designed for us to pay attention to it. And so it's not like a groundbreaking way to do it, but it's a pretty analog way. It's just to physically separate yourself from it if you can, for as little or as long as you can stand.
Yeah, and if you think about it, like if you were at dinner with someone and their phone is face up or face down, it has a different feeling, right? And so I think when our phone is there, even if we're not on it, our kids feel that. At least I believe so. My daughter like tries to rip out my ear things when I walk in and forget that they're in my ears. My 2-year-old, she'll just like immediately try and take them out. And we don't realize like kind of the presence of it is communicating like a sort of like I'm not fully here, and they make those connections. So Sarah, someone weighed in, and maybe Sophie too, about how do you navigate this when there's like so many different styles of parenting, and maybe you made conscious decisions to put your phone away during bed and bath, and then you have friends who are staying over and they play TV during dinner or something, or vice versa, whatever it is. Anything, or any of you, like, advice on like kind of to navigate that and how you don't want to like offend people, or do you feel like that rubs off in terms of children being around it, their peers and
it's hard. It's really hard. Sophie, you go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, something that came up time and time again with people I was interviewing was this phrase of everything in moderation. And it's like kind of scientifically valid in a lot of ways. And so this idea that I had that like screen time, like any kind of screen time was just going to be like sullying my child. Like we can talk about kind of the better programming and like kind of how to think about a philosophy of putting your kids in front of screens at all. But I will say that like the idea that it's going to rub off on your kid and that will be kind of something that you can't take back. Kids are resilient and they will respond to your cues, and like nothing terrible is going to happen if they watch like the 7th hour of Paw Patrol. It's just like, I think it's trying to set standards in your own home and just say like, we don't do that. Like those are not our values. But like when you're over at so-and-so's house, if that's what they're going to do, Like, unless you really want to excise your kid from that person's life, it's like, I don't know, stuff happens and the kid has to learn that there are different boundaries in different places. That's what I would say. But Sarah, you probably have a more like clinical background in weighing in on that.
I mean, I very much agree with you. I think our kids are really adept at understanding that I have different expectations and roles and with different people and different places. So like, just like, you know, if you aren't gonna, you know, candy, like the thing with candy, we just had Halloween, that came up a lot where, you know, every family has different rules around that. And so kids learn like at certain places, this is where this is okay. In certain places, we don't do this. And so I think kids are actually really, like you said, resilient and also very intelligent when it comes to understanding that there are different times for different things. And I actually think the most important thing we could do as parents when it comes to technology and our children is help them to be educated consumers of technology. And that starts, unfortunately, it starts at birth. Like it really starts immediately. It has to, because they see it from birth, and they, you know, obviously you're not going to try to explain to a 3-month-old about the television, but you are going to make those choices consciously, understanding that you have a value system and it's unique to you. It's unique to your family. There's no right or wrong, but whatever your value system is, you want to kind of think and forecast like, okay, this is what it's playing out like right now at 3 months or 3 years. What's it going to look like when they're 13? What's it going to look like when they're 9? And everybody's getting phones, because this is coming up a lot in my practice with parents of 8-year-olds. And even I think like 8 is surprisingly, a lot of kids are getting phones. And so how do we handle that? How do we handle kids wanting to be Switch players and like YouTube stars? And like, that's what they want to be. You know, this is their world, and they want TikTok and they want Snapchat. And I literally had to figure out what half the stuff my patients were telling me, because I was like, I'm dealing with like little baby problems. I'm not looking at like the middle school and teenage problems in my family, but I see them in my practice and it's big. And so you cannot prevent them from knowing about this stuff. You can't prevent them from experiencing it and being curious about it. And so making sure that they understand why your family has the values that they do, and why we limit this in this way, and why we're okay if you go to your friends and you watch it. But if you're going to watch it, we want you to know, like, what's a commercial? What is the function of a commercial? Someone's trying to sell you something. Like, we want our kids to know what's going on, so that, like Abby said with Social Dilemma, that they are aware that they are being sold to, that they are being made to be manipulated in some ways into engaging in certain behaviors over and over and over mindlessly. And so I think education is very empowering for kids.
I want you, Abby, to add on to that if you can. Just, I think it's similar with, like, you know, Sarah brought up candy, and, you know, and you being wellness dietitian background, you know, it's one thing to like only give our children, you know, the healthiest foods and foods that we really feel strongly about, and, you know, not allow them to eat, you know, the cake at birthday parties and stuff like that. But until when, and like, you hear these stories of how like you prevented a child from eating all this, and then they got to a certain age and went crazy with it. And so, you know, do you feel like that's similar in this area of what Sarah's saying? And
it's exactly the same. And, you know, personally, I'm going through this right now. When my toddler goes to daycare, like, I don't really have anything that has added sugar in my house. It's just not in my house. And I found out they were giving him these Belvita cookies, and they're like 11 grams of added sugar. And I was just like, oh my God, I can't believe it. And I literally looked at my toddler and I was like, you're so happy without this cookie at home. Like, an apple to you is a great experience, right? I'm not denying him at home of food. He loves his apple, or like whatever it is. And as a parent, then like I feel bad bringing it up to daycare to say like, I don't want him eating the Belvita cookie. Like, I I felt bad about it. And we have to be able to stand up for what we believe in and what we feel is best for our child. One Belvita cookie is not going to ruin my child, but like every single day, if he's getting that and he expects that, then that's going to change his palate for foods that I give him at home. And we can always, as parents, stand up for what we believe in is best for our children in a polite, kind way. And if you feel like your child is going to someone's home and you don't want them watching, something that's really inappropriate, you're allowed to have an adult conversation about things ahead of time. I think right now everyone is like super sensitive. It's just like, we don't want to offend anyone. We don't want to say the wrong thing. And the downside of that is sometimes we feel afraid to speak up for something that we feel strongly about. And I urge everyone, if you are kind and nice in your delivery and have a conversation with someone, most people are receptive on the other end.
Yeah. And, adding on to that, as your child gets older, like explaining those views and, hopefully them taking that in as their own value. That's all that we can do. And so I think instead of just like, as they get older, sheltering, like similar to, building that inner voice around it, not obviously like conditioning, like you hate the Belvita cookie, don't like,
Right.
like, as he starts to ask more and more, like, why don't I have that cookie? You can if you want, but in our home, we do this. And, you'll, as they get older and older, you'll make your own decisions, but these are the things that, are at risk when there's too much, or, I think we think like we can't have those conversations. And I mean, when they're older, and we just think, let's just like control and avoid. But till when? So if he's someone, had asked about, feeling like they are very like obsessive with like monitoring and, when their child pees and poops and like their sleep. And so how do we kind of wean ourselves if we're using gadgets like
For sure.
all over the place?
I wrote a whole chapter on this because I found too with my first daughter, like the pull to document everything and to measure things and to constantly be tracking things is very, very strong. And it's like to get very nerdy. It's like something that's conditioned within us as human beings, as a species, is to just like, collect new data and make sure that you can monitor everything and control everything. I think, the best piece of advice about this I got was from my pediatrician. And he was like, look, we monitor 3 things with young kids. We monitor their weight, we monitor their height or like their length, and we monitor their head circumference. And we do it because if they're out of whack in some way, or all of them are higher than the growth curve or lower than the growth curve, it can indicate like real things that we need to keep an eye on. But we monitor them for you at the intervals in which we need to monitor them for you. That's why we have pediatrician visits on like the first week, the second week, the first month, the second month, whatever it is so they can keep track of the important stuff. So everything else and the level of granularity with which these devices allow you to take measurements of weight and height and poops and pees and all this stuff. Some people I spoke to said it gave them peace of mind. For me, I found that it just made me very, very anxious to know that my daughter was or was not drinking this number of ounces per nursing session, and it was down my left boob was making more milk than my right boob during these hours. And it was like, what is happening in my brain? It's like I'm already operating on such little sleep. Do I really need to be filling my brain with this stuff? The answer is like, you really don't, unless there are very outsized cases. And in those cases, by and large, your baby would not be released from the hospital. And so I think, if you find that it's making you anxious, you should know that it's not something that you have to do in order for your baby to thrive. If it is making you calmer, fine. I found that it really just made me jangled and aware of things that ultimately were not that important. So like, rest assured that the professionals are taking care of it for you. And I will just quickly say, like, the idea that if you can like monitor your kids' sleep, then they will like be spat out at the other end sleeping through the night, like, fat chance. Good luck with that. There are definitely ways of getting your kid to sleep through the night, but like the intense monitoring and some of these gadgets that will do it for you, it's like you find yourself glued to your phone being like, oh my God, they rolled over at 2 a.m. Like, what does that mean? It's like, doesn't mean anything. It means they rolled over.
I think lastly, if all of you can kind of, and not lastly, we have 2 minutes, so anything else too, but last question on my end is, you know, in both the COVID era and social media era, that, you know, like what are your thoughts on, you know, the shift that's happened? I know personally, like, social media has become more of a presence in our home because of COVID. And I think just because each year it's more of a presence in people's homes, you know, or many homes. What, like, yeah, if any of you can weigh in on thoughts around that reality, you know, I know we just kind of talked about like TikTok and all these other things, but, you know, if there's any like thing you could recommend, like, is it, Sarah, your kids are slightly older, like, do you talk about social media with them?
Yeah. So, I mean, it's my practice, they're older, but like my kids are 4 and 2.5.
I meant, right. I meant like a little bit older than the parents here, like who have infants and stuff like that. Like,
Right.
if you put up a picture, do you say I'm sharing it
Yeah.
with friends, or
No, we don't really
is it
talk
something
about
that
it. It's
you
kind of
do?
off their radar. I'm conscious of trying to keep it off their radar a little bit for as long as I can, but I know that it will come onto their radar and then I will be forced to reckon with it. But like right now, I'm just kind of like hanging on to the fact that my children are just young and isolated from it. But
And
I
also
will,
during COVID, like when you like finish what you're saying, but like if you were like, I have to work, and then you're on your phone doing like Instagram lives and just, yeah.
that is like, it's funny. Like, I'm not worried about my kids. I'm worried about me. Like, I have become so, I mean, you know, COVID, everything went virtual, everything went digital. Most of our businesses moved on to this sphere. And I didn't even start posting on Instagram as a psychologist until COVID. In part because I was on Instagram more and I was reading all these things and I was like, some of this stuff is not so wonderful. And I would like to be a voice that counters some of that. So I was just like felt compelled to be on it, mostly because I was on it more. And then I got on it way more. And then now I'm like a year and a half in, 2 years in, my business, a huge part of my work is on social media. And that's like one super weird to me to get used to that. And it happened very quickly. So it's like, I don't have the skill set for managing it because it's not something I literally, it was like massive growing pains. And I just like, I am like so much more addicted to my phone. I notice that I have cravings for it. My brain wants that dopamine hit. I'm like reaching for it whenever there's a lull. And I'm actually working really hard right now to fix out to address that because it's not healthy for me. Like, I'm aware that it's not healthy for me. I'm watching my kids watch me be unhealthy with my phone for myself, right? This isn't zero judgment on anybody else's phone use. I'm just saying I've noticed, comparing myself to 2 years ago, I'm seeing a shift in my own use in a way that I don't feel good about. And this kind of relates to the woman who asked about being obsessive monitoring the pee and the poop and like, how do you wean yourself off? It's really hard. And I think part of it is we have to recognize it is a bit of an addiction. Like, just like Abby probably helps people wean off of sugar addictions. Like when we use our phone specifically, you know, we get, and a social media exponentially so, we get dopamine hits, right? We are activating the pleasure and reward center of our brain over and over and over, like rapid fire. And we're literally getting kind of like a high off of it. And we get used to that. And when we take it away, our brain is saying, hold up, where's my hit of that dopamine? I'm waiting for that. I'm expecting it. And you might even notice that there are times of days when you use your phone more because, and notice that you get more irritable at those times of day if you can't get on your phone. So like the first thing I would start to do is start noticing how often you're using it, and then start to pay attention to like where in the day is it happening the most. And I would start, trying to titrate off of it a little bit in ways, whatever ways you can, whether, Sophie's idea or someone was telling you about like a lockbox or putting it in the other room, or, just turning it off, like disarming it and just saying like, I'm going to detox a little bit. And sometimes that is, it's very hard to do because our lives are so intertwined with our phones. But if you can do it for small periods of time and kind of build up that brain's capacity to not have that hit of dopamine for longer and longer and longer stretches, that would be a start. I also think just specifically to like tracking data on our kids, like we can get addicted to that or feel very dependent on that. Like I went through that. I was my first, I used an app and I tracked everything and I couldn't stop. I was aware. I was like, I'm so dependent on this that I'm so afraid to not do it. And so with my second, I like consciously chose not to use an app because I was like, I just don't want to feel attached to that app. I want to use my own connection with my daughter and our cues and her cues to tell me what I need to know. And it was very liberating and I recommend it. Especially if you have done it with an app with your first and you're having a second, like see how it goes without first. But I think it can make you anxious, but I think it's also a response to anxiety. Like I think we get on the apps because we're anxious that we don't know enough or that we're not going to know enough. And I think getting on the app and confirming our fear that we don't actually know enough, we really do need the app, actually undermines our ability to say, I really do know enough. I can do this. I'm a confident, competent parent. My child's a confident, competent individual who can tell me what they need and we can communicate together. Like, so it is hard. I'm going very long-winded on this because I feel very passionate about it, but it's hard. And I think we want to remind ourselves that we can do it.
I really value that response, and there's so much that spoke to me in it. So yeah, not long-winded. Sophie, I'm sure it's in your book. I just didn't get to ask you about like educational apps and stuff like that for kids. But since many of the participants here have younger, I don't know how relevant it is, but is there any like line or two you could say about your views on that before we say goodbye and just tell everyone where they can find us?
Sure. I would say like very, very quickly that like the educational stamp is thrown around a lot. And it's not always backed up that much. And just to kind of like reference something we already spoke about, like what the kid kind of needs more is the cardboard box and to turn that cardboard box into a spaceship and to do all these things with it. That a lot of educational programming or educational toys that have the stamp, some of them can be wonderful and very, very thoughtful and very beautiful and very tactile. I'm not saying across the board it's not a good stamp, but I do think that you should face those with a little bit of skepticism, and sort of understand that like a baseline of boredom for a kid, which can be really wonderful for them developmentally and kind of cause them to enrich themselves and become more creative. Like you don't need to feel the need to like give them something that is educationally stamped all the time. Like they can come up with the magic themselves, as you find if you just kind of like get past that little tantrumy phase or that little phase where they're like, mommy, I need you to do this with me. Just see if they can do it on their own. And like often they will become engrossed in things, and not always, sometimes you can't do that, but just kind of to piggyback and sort of to like put a pin in what Sarah said, like Silicon Valley for the most part is telling parents that they don't know their kid as well as Silicon Valley does, and that the technology can like make you a better parent and make your kid a better kid. And I think at the root of it, it's like your kid better. Like you just do. And you can be anxious about stuff and it can be new to you, but like try to find your gut in there. Like it's in there. You know, even though there's a lot of messaging that's coming at you telling you that like you can be doing it better, like you're probably doing it pretty great. And so just like rest on that a little bit before you turn to a gadget to do it for you.
Thank you. Yeah, and having confidence and exuding that confidence that our kids can, you know, get by without all of it too. Where can everyone find you? You guys have such great views on this and so much more. If you can quickly say, and then I know we're over time. Sophie.
I have just my website is my name, sophiebrickman.com. If anybody has questions too that they suddenly think of, I know that these are like there's a lot of information coming at you. Like feel free to message me directly. You can get to me through my website, and if you're interested in the book, please check it out.
Thank you. Sarah, your Instagram name's on there.
Yeah. You can find me at Dr. Sarah Bren. I have a podcast called Securely Attached, which is all about attachment theory and helping parents find their confidence and understand basic fundamentals of attachment and development and psychology. And it's fun. Jenny was on it. She has an awesome episode on play. And my
You
website,
don't have to
Dr.
read
Sarah
that.
Bren. What?
No, you don't have to read that. Keep going. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
It's a good episode. Listen to it. But my website's drsarahbread.com.
Thank you. And Abby?
And my website is abbysfoodcourt.com, and you can find me on Instagram at Abby's Food Court. Although I'm terrible at posting recently because I just can't
so
do it.
much. And no, you're not. Remember, we have to have confidence in who
Yes.
we are and exude
Yes.
that.
I am confidently not on Instagram. Often.
Okay, fair enough, but I disagree. Thank you all for joining us, and thank you, the panelists, Sarah, Sophie, and Abby. Have a good night, everyone.
Good night,
Good
guys.
night.
Thank you.